The church was silent. Mourners stood in their black coats, the weight of the Duchess of Kent's passing heavy in the air. But in the middle of that solemn scene, something unfolded that no one could have predicted. Catherine, Princess of Wales, leaned toward King Charles with a whisper so sharp, so dangerous, that it sent shockwaves down the pews. And at the end of the aisle, Prince Harry's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, his fury barely contained. What secret could possibly be so devastating that it sparked a storm at a funeral? This wasn't gossip. This wasn't idle chatter. This was Catherine revealing that Harry was working on something darker, sharper, and far more dangerous than anyone realized. A second memoir. Not just another book, but an explosive sequel to Spare, a manuscript rumored to contain the kinds of secrets that could dismantle the carefully polished image of the monarchy. And Catherine wasn't just sharing idle suspicions. She was warning Charles directly, her voice steady, her eyes sharp, her words cutting through the heavy air like glass breaking on marble. Imagine being Harry in that moment. Imagine hearing your sister-in-law, in front of your father, expose your deepest, most dangerous plan. Wouldn't you be furious too? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why does this matter right now? Because not even a week before, Harry and King Charles had taken the world by surprise with a reconciliation meeting at Clarence House. Smiles, warmth, the faint spark of hope. Newspapers splashed images of a father and son repairing their fractured bond. And yet, in the space of a whisper at a funeral, Catherine pulled the rug out from under that fragile truce. She turned peace into suspicion, reconciliation into fresh betrayal. What does that tell us? That nothing in this family is ever as it seems. That behind every staged photograph, every polite smile, there's a war raging that the public is never meant to see. Think about the timing. Funerals are supposed to be about respect, remembrance, and unity. But here, in the shadows of mourning, Catherine chose her moment. Was it a deliberate strike? A queen-in-waiting protecting the throne from a ticking time bomb? Or was it desperation, an attempt to warn Charles before it was too late? And what about Harry? His anger was instant, his glare cutting across the room. To him, this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration of war. After all, Catherine had exposed the very weapon he'd been quietly forging, a second tell-all memoir that insiders claim could make Spare look tame. Now, let's not forget, Spare was no small bombshell. It shook the palace, rattled the press, and sent shockwaves around the world. But insiders always whispered that the first book wasn't the full story. That whole sections had been held back, edited out, suppressed. Why? Because they were deemed too damaging, too dangerous, too risky to reveal while the queen was still alive, or while certain relationships still needed to be preserved. But now the guardrails are gone. Now Harry is freer, angrier, and more desperate than ever. And Catherine knows it. She knows the kind of destruction he can unleash. Which is why her warning wasn't just a family squabble. It was a political act, a defense of the monarchy itself. Picture it. King Charles, already burdened by health rumors, financial scandals, and endless public scrutiny, sitting in that pew as his daughter-in-law leans in and whispers the words no monarch wants to hear. Your son is preparing to betray you, again. The reconciliation you thought you had secured at Clarence House was an illusion. The son you thought you were healing with is sharpening the knife behind your back. Can you imagine the look on Charles's face? The way his hand might have gripped the pew, his shoulders stiffening under the weight of that whispered revelation? Because this wasn't just about Harry. This was about the very survival of the crown. And the irony? Just days earlier, the headlines had been about forgiveness. About Charles and Harry finally seeing eye to eye, finally putting bitterness behind them. Clarence House was meant to be a symbol of peace. A photo opportunity, yes, but also a real chance at healing. People whispered about Harry being welcomed home, about Charles extending the olive branch. And then, Catherine drops the truth. Harry wasn't there to reconcile. He was there to soften the ground, to create the illusion of unity, even as he prepared to strike. Doesn't that sting? Doesn't it feel like betrayal at the highest level? Let me ask you this. What would you do if you were in Charles's shoes? Would you confront your son head-on, demand answers, risk a fight? Or would you quietly prepare for the storm, reinforce the palace walls, and pretend nothing happened? Because that's the position Catherine left Charles in with that one whisper. It was more than family drama. It was a battle plan revealed. And Harry knew it. He knew, in that moment, that Catherine had sabotaged him, which is why his fury was so raw, so visible, so immediate. But here's the real twist. Catherine wasn't acting out of spite. She wasn't trying to humiliate Harry for the sake of it. No, she was trying to save the monarchy, protect her husband, her children, the very future she's preparing to step into as queen. And for her, silence wasn't an option. She'd seen too much, heard too much, and she knew the cost of keeping secrets. That's why she chose that moment, that whisper, that warning. It was calculated, it was deliberate, and it was explosive. And yet, what does that mean for Harry? For Meghan? For the fragile image they've built in America, in Hollywood, on streaming platforms? If Catherine is right, then Harry is sitting on a powder keg. A second memoir that could burn bridges not just with his family, but with the very institution that made him who he is. And once those words hit the page, there's no going back. No forgiveness. No reconciliation. Just war. So the question becomes, was Catherine exposing him to protect the monarchy, or to stop Harry from destroying himself? Here's where the story gets darker. Because insiders say Harry's second book doesn't just include petty grievances, personal anecdotes, or family feuds. It contains secrets, stories buried for decades. Stories that could tarnish not just Charles, not just William, but the monarchy as a whole. Financial scandals, private conversations, hidden conflicts. The kinds of details that make Spare look like a children's fairy tale. And Catherine knew. She knew because whispers always reach the palace sooner than they reach the press. And once she knew, she couldn't stay silent. Now imagine being in Harry's shoes. You've kept your plan close to your chest. You've whispered it only to those you trust. You've watched as the press speculates, but never quite confirms. And then, at a funeral of all places, your sister-in-law blows your cover. She outs you in front of the one man whose trust you desperately need. Can you feel the rage boiling inside him? The betrayal slicing through him? The humiliation of knowing his carefully guarded secret was no longer his to control? That's the fire that erupted in Harry's eyes at the Duchess of Kent's funeral. And here's the cliffhanger we're left with. Catherine's whisper wasn't just a warning. It was the trigger, the moment that turned a fragile reconciliation into a ticking time bomb. Because if Harry truly is writing a second tell-all, then Catherine's revelation didn't just expose him. It lit the fuse. And what comes next? Well, let's just say, if you thought Spare was shocking, you haven't seen anything yet. Because the next chapter in this royal saga isn't about forgiveness. It's about survival. The whisper was only the beginning. Behind that single act of quiet revelation lay a web of secrets, negotiations, and plans that had been building for months, perhaps even years. Catherine may have delivered the blow at the Duchess of Kent's funeral, but the rumor she exposed had been circulating in hushed corners of London's publishing world long before it reached King Charles's ears. And when it finally reached him, the timing could not have been worse. Because here's the shocking truth. Harry's second memoir wasn't a spontaneous idea. It wasn't some heat-of-the-moment reaction after Spare. It was in motion even before the first book was published. Yes, you heard that right. As editors and publishers were busy cutting lines, removing pages, and softening the blows in Spare, there were whispers that Harry was already drafting something even darker. Something unfiltered. Something raw. Think about it. Spare was an international sensation. Love it or hate it, it sold millions. But behind the scenes, industry insiders were clear. What Harry submitted originally was far more explosive. Pages upon pages were left on the cutting room floor. Why? Because they weren't fit for publication at that time. Out of respect for the late Queen. Out of fear of litigation. Out of worry for the monarchy's stability. But what happens to those cut sections? Do they vanish forever? Or do they wait, quietly, for their moment? Insiders claim Harry held back entire chapters. Stories that made even sympathetic editors uneasy. Allegations so raw that lawyers intervened. Scenes so personal that even Meghan raised an eyebrow. But instead of deleting them, Harry simply tucked them away. Waiting. Preparing. Building the foundations for a second memoir that would finish the job Spare started. Can you imagine what kind of details were considered too dangerous for a book that already accused Prince William of physically attacking him, revealed his drug use, and shattered royal privacy at unprecedented levels? If that was what made it to print, what on earth was left behind? Now, ask yourself this. How do these rumors reach Catherine? How do whispers from publishers and editors find their way into the royal circle? The answer is simple, because nothing stays hidden in a world this small, this powerful, and this cutthroat. Publishing is a business, a billion-dollar business. And when someone like Prince Harry dangles the possibility of a sequel, tongues wag. Leaks happen. And soon enough, the palace knows. Catherine knew. And she carried that knowledge like a weapon, choosing her moment to unsheath it. And why at the funeral? That's the question, isn't it? Why whisper to Charles then, at such a delicate moment, instead of in private? Because Catherine understood the stakes. She knew Charles needed to hear it when his guard was down, when the pomp and protocol couldn't shield him. The funeral, with its silence and gravity, was the perfect backdrop. The words would hit harder, sink deeper. And maybe, just maybe, Charles would finally see Harry for what Catherine believed he had become, not a prodigal son returning for reconciliation, but a ticking bomb, disguised as a memoirist. But let's step back for a moment. Where exactly did these rumors begin? It started, insiders say, with Penguin Random House. After Spare's success, executives were salivating. They knew Harry's name alone was worth gold. But they also knew controversy sells. And when Harry hinted in private meetings that he had enough for 2 books, ears perked up. Imagine the dollar signs flashing before their eyes. A second volume could break records, crash websites, dominate headlines. But it wasn't just about money. For Harry, it was about control. Control of the narrative. Control of the truth. Control of the monarchy's story before it controls him. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just speculation. Reports leaked that Harry himself admitted he had cut out nearly half of what he wanted to say in Spare. Half. That means what the world read wasn't the full story. It was just the beginning. So ask yourself, what's in that missing half? What kinds of revelations were too dangerous for public eyes then, but not too dangerous forever? Catherine, ever the strategist, knew exactly how dangerous those missing pages could be. Imagine being the future queen and knowing that your children's inheritance, the crown itself, could be tainted by the words of your brother-in-law. Words that might live on forever in print, shaping history, defining legacies. Could she stay silent? Could she risk it? No. Which is why, when the moment came, she chose to speak, to warn, to act. But Harry's side of the story is just as intriguing. From his perspective, Catherine's whisper wasn't about protection. It was sabotage, a deliberate attempt to paint him as a traitor, to destroy his credibility, to pit Charles against him. After all, Harry had just reconciled with his father at Clarence House. Just days earlier, he had sat in that grand, historic home, sipping tea with Charles, sharing what looked like a moment of warmth. For once, the press coverage had been positive. For once, it seemed like healing was possible. And then, Catherine tore it apart. So, let me ask you this. Was Harry ever truly planning reconciliation? Or was Clarence House just a stage, a photo op, a carefully orchestrated move to soften public perception before he launched his second strike? Because that's what Catherine implied. That his reconciliation wasn't real. That it was a performance. And if that's true, then Catherine's whisper didn't just expose a secret. It exposed a strategy. And yet, what if Catherine was wrong? What if Harry had been sincere at Clarence House, and Catherine's whisper turned that fragile hope into dust? That's the tragedy of this family. We'll never truly know who is honest, who is calculated, who is desperate, and who is ruthless. What we do know is this. Catherine believed Harry's second memoir was real. She believed it was dangerous. And she made sure Charles believed it too. But here's where things take an even darker turn. Because if Harry's second book exists, if those missing pages are sitting in some draft on his laptop, then Catherine may have just accelerated the timeline. She may have pushed Harry from planning to act. Because nothing provokes a man like being exposed. Nothing fuels anger like being betrayed by family, again. And Harry, already furious at Catherine's whisper, may see no choice but to press forward with the book. To prove her right. Or to punish her for making her warning public. And that's where we're left at the end of this chapter. With Catherine's whisper hanging in the air like a dagger, with Harry's fury boiling over, and with King Charles caught in the middle of yet another storm. Because what Catherine revealed wasn't just rumor. It was the possibility of a second book that could shatter the monarchy's already fragile image. And whether that book is real, imagined, or somewhere in between, one thing is certain: her words changed everything. But what came next would change even more. Because the whispers about Harry's second memoir weren't just about stories left untold. They were about something far more dangerous: hidden files, secret recordings, and evidence that could turn rumor into undeniable truth. And if Catherine thought her warning at the funeral was explosive, she had no idea what Harry had kept locked away in his private arsenal. The whispers were only part of the story. What Catherine revealed was devastating enough, but the truth that followed carried an even darker weight. Because the real question that has haunted insiders for months is this: where did these rumors of a second memoir actually begin? And how did they escape Harry's tightly guarded circle? Let's rewind to the moment Spare hit the shelves. The book dominated headlines, social media, dinner table conversations. People couldn't stop talking about Harry's revelations: his fight with William, his frostbitten confession, his drug use, and his portrayal of a family that looked nothing like the polished royal image we'd been fed for decades. But even as readers tore through the pages, one detail slipped out almost unnoticed. Harry himself admitted he had enough material for 2 books. Not 1, 2. Can you believe that? He wasn't just sitting on scraps or half-finished anecdotes. He was sitting on an entire second volume, packed with revelations too raw to include in Spare. Publishing insiders were stunned. Imagine being in that boardroom, hearing the Duke of Sussex say, "This isn't even the full story." Immediately, the chatter began. Editors whispered, lawyers panicked, PR teams strategized, and the question lingered: what was left out, and when would it come out? That's how the rumors began, but the flames spread fast. Before long, whispers traveled from Penguin Random House to literary agents, to journalists sniffing around, and finally, back to the palace. Here's the kicker: Harry never denied it. He never said, "No, there won't be a second book." Instead, he left the door wide open. He teased it. He allowed speculation to swirl. Why? Because speculation itself was power. It kept the monarchy on edge. It kept the public hooked. It kept publishers interested. Whether or not a second memoir was already underway, the idea alone was enough to unsettle everyone. Now think about Catherine. She's no fool. She knows how the press works, how rumors mutate into narratives. She knows that once whispers start, there's usually a grain of truth. And when she leaned into Charles's ear at the Duchess of Kent's funeral, she wasn't passing along gossip for the sake of drama. She was delivering what she believed to be critical intelligence. Harry wasn't done. He was reloading. But here's what makes this even more chilling. Sources close to the publishing industry claimed Harry's first draft of Spare was nearly twice as long as what eventually hit shelves. Entire chapters were cut. Stories about Charles and Camilla's private disputes, stories about William and Kate's behind-the-scenes arguments, and even passages about the Queen herself. All stripped away. Why? Because lawyers advised against it. Because it was deemed too sensitive while the Queen was alive. But stripped away doesn't mean destroyed. It means archived, waiting, biding its time. And this is where the speculation takes on a life of its own. Imagine Harry, sitting in Montecito, looking at those drafts. Hundreds of pages of untold secrets. Pages that could paint Charles in an unflattering light. Pages that could drag William into the mud. Pages that could tarnish the very crown his mother once wore. Do you think he just deleted them? Or do you think he saved them, tucked away, for the day when the world was ready, or when he was angry enough to unleash them? Here's a question for you. What kind of stories would be considered too damaging to publish, even in a book as explosive as Spare? Let that sink in. If the physical fight with William was safe enough to print, if details about Charles's coldness were safe enough to print, then what wasn't? What could possibly be worse? Think about that for a moment. And now we circle back to Catherine. She had every reason to believe these whispers weren't just smoke, but fire. After all, she's lived with Harry and Meghan's pattern for years. The interviews, the Netflix series, the podcasts. Every time Harry and Meghan promised one thing, they delivered something even more controversial. Every time the palace thought the storm was over, another one rolled in. Catherine knew better than anyone that Harry's words weren't idle threats. They were promises. Promises wrapped in suspense. Now here's where it gets personal. Insiders say Catherine was particularly protective of William during all of this. Why? Because she knew Harry's most brutal stories weren't about Charles. They were about William. That's right, her husband, the future king. Harry had already accused William of attacking him. What else could he say? What other confrontations might he reveal? Catherine, standing in that pew at the funeral, knew she had to get ahead of it. She had to warn Charles before Harry dropped the bomb. Because if William's image collapsed, so too would the monarchy's future. But here's the twist. Harry wasn't just collecting memories. Rumors suggest he was collecting evidence. Notes, recordings, diaries, receipts, as Meghan liked to call them. Which means his second memoir wouldn't just be words. It could be backed up with proof. Proof that would silence doubters and cripple palace denials. Can you imagine Catherine's horror at that possibility? Can you imagine Charles's heart sinking as she whispered it into his ear? And this is where Harry's fury makes sense. From his perspective, Catherine's whisper wasn't just a warning. It was exposure. She had stripped away his power to surprise, to control the narrative. He'd been outmaneuvered in front of his father, the one man whose approval he desperately craved, the one man whose trust he needed to maintain. And now Charles would forever look at him with suspicion, wondering what secrets he was sitting on, wondering when the knife would drop. That kind of betrayal isn't easily forgiven. That kind of humiliation burns deep. And for Harry, who has spent years fighting to control his story, Catherine's whisper felt like theft. She stole his moment. She stole his leverage. She stole the narrative. And in Harry's world, that's unforgivable. But here's where things take a darker turn. Because the publishing whispers weren't just about pages and chapters. They were about intent. Editors claimed Harry was determined to tell his truth, fully, brutally, unapologetically. That means no holding back, no redactions, no legal edits softening the blows. If that's true, then Catherine's whisper wasn't just a warning. It was a prophecy of a second memoir that could do what Spare didn't, detonate the monarchy from the inside out. And the chilling part? Catherine's whisper might have accelerated it. Because when you expose someone's plan too early, you don't stop it. You push them to act faster. You corner them. You force their hand. And Harry, humiliated at the funeral, may now feel more compelled than ever to unleash the very memoir Catherine warned about. So where does that leave us? In a family torn apart, a monarchy on edge, and a prince caught between reconciliation and revenge. Catherine's whisper at the funeral didn't end the story. It started a countdown. A countdown to a book, a bombshell, a betrayal that could shake the palace to its very foundations. But Catherine wasn't finished. Because the whisper wasn't just about rumors. It was about proof. Proof that Harry wasn't only telling stories. He was keeping records. And the files he's allegedly holding could make his words impossible to deny. And that is where things take a terrifying turn. What if the whispers weren't just whispers? What if Catherine's warning wasn't about half-written manuscripts or rumors passed through publishing circles, but about something far more dangerous? Because hidden in the heart of this entire saga is one chilling allegation. Harry has been keeping records. Not just memories. Not just journal entries. Actual recordings. Tapes. Notes. Evidence. The kind of material that could transform gossip into undeniable proof. And that's where this story shifts from scandal to threat. Think about it. A memoir is one thing. A carefully written, edited, lawyer-approved book can still be dismissed by the palace as Harry's truth, his perspective, his opinion. But recordings? Audio of private conversations? Diaries filled with word-for-word recollections? Those can't be brushed aside so easily. That's what makes this chapter so terrifying for the monarchy. Because Catherine's whisper may have only been scratching the surface of what Harry is truly capable of unleashing. Let's go back. When Harry and Meghan first left the UK, commentators often joked about them taking receipts. It sounded like a throwaway phrase, but in hindsight, it might have been literal. Meghan, ever media savvy, knows the power of documentation. In Hollywood, in lawsuits, in business deals, proof is everything. Words are weak without evidence. And rumor has it that she urged Harry to protect himself, to keep a record, to make sure that, should it ever come down to his word against the monarchies, he'd have the upper hand. So imagine Harry, phone in hand, hitting record during tense conversations. Picture him jotting down notes in his journals after every confrontation with Charles, William, or even Catherine. See him saving texts, printing emails, preserving every breadcrumb of the royal family's behavior. One by one, a private archive begins to form. Not just a memoir in the making, but a case file, a weapon, a vault of secrets that only he controls. And let's be clear, this isn't entirely speculation. Harry himself admitted in interviews that he kept notes. He confessed to writing things down as therapy, as a way to process his trauma. He acknowledged the painful truths he held onto for years before releasing them in spare. But what he didn't release, the unspoken, the unshared, could be far more damning. Catherine knew this. She knew Harry wasn't just relying on memory. He was building a fortress of facts. And that's why her whisper carried so much weight. Because here's the bombshell. If Harry truly has recordings, then Catherine's warning to Charles wasn't simply about another book. It was about blackmail. Imagine the implications. Harry, holding on to hours of recorded conversations, ready to use them if reconciliation fails, ready to leak them if the palace pushes back too hard, ready to publish them in a memoir that would make Spare look like a bedtime story. Wouldn't you be afraid if you were Charles? Wouldn't you see your entire reign hanging by a thread? Let me ask you, what do you think would be more damaging? Harry publishing another 400-page memoir of painful anecdotes? Or Harry releasing a 30-second audio clip of Charles speaking candidly about the Queen, or William raging in private, or Catherine herself making remarks meant to stay behind closed doors? Which would shake the monarchy more? Words on a page, or voices caught forever in time? That's the nightmare scenario Catherine may have been alluding to. And here's where Meghan's influence can't be ignored. She understands optics. She understands receipts. She understands leverage. To her, a recording isn't just protection, it's power. In a world where narratives can be twisted, where institutions control headlines, Meghan would know that having hard proof could tip the balance forever. Which raises the question, was Meghan the one who encouraged Harry to keep these files in the first place? Was Catherine indirectly warning Charles not just about Harry's memoir, but about Meghan's strategy? Now picture Harry's fury at that funeral. Imagine sitting there, knowing you've collected material for years, your insurance, your truth, your ultimate defense. And suddenly, Catherine whispers to your father that you're plotting to use it. She exposes your weapon before you can even draw it. Of course, Harry was furious. His eyes burned, his fists clenched, because Catherine wasn't just calling him out. She was neutralizing his leverage. And for Harry, leverage is survival. But here's the contradiction. If Harry truly has recordings and files, then Catherine's whisper may have had the opposite effect. Instead of stopping him, it may have forced his hand. Because once you're exposed, the only option left is to escalate, to release, to unleash, to make sure the world knows your side before the palace can discredit you. That's why her whisper might not have been a shield for Charles. It may have been the spark that ignited Harry's rage into action. And think about the palace's nightmare. For centuries, the monarchy has thrived on secrecy. Conversations never recorded, deals never written down, scandals buried in silence. It's how they survived. But Harry may have shattered that system forever. By keeping records, by storing files, by building an arsenal of truth, he's undone the very foundation the monarchy stands on, discretion. And if those files ever reach the light of day, it won't just be a family feud. It'll be a constitutional crisis. Now, let me throw this question to you. Do you believe Harry's potential second memoir would be just his story, painful but subjective? Or do you believe, like Catherine, that it will come armed with proof? Proof that can't be denied, twisted, or dismissed. Because if it's the latter, then Catherine's whisper at the funeral wasn't just a warning. It was a revelation of the monarchy's darkest fear. But here's where it gets even more shocking. Because whispers of Harry's secret files don't just point to diaries and recordings. Some insiders believe Harry may have in his possession material so sensitive it could shake the monarchy's financial foundations. Emails, correspondence, receipts. And if Catherine was warning Charles about that, then we're not just talking about embarrassment. We're talking about destabilization. Which leads us to the next question, the one no one at the funeral dared to say out loud. If Harry truly is sitting on an arsenal of files and recordings, how long before he uses them? How long before reconciliation turns into exposure? And how long before Catherine's whisper becomes prophecy? Because one thing is certain, Harry's private vault isn't just a collection of memories. It's a ticking time bomb. And when it explodes, the monarchy may never recover. But the real twist? Catherine herself wasn't just trying to save Charles. She was trying to save William. Because much of what Harry is rumored to have kept isn't about Charles at all. It's about his brother. And the revelations about William could be the most devastating of all. The shadow of William loomed large over everything Catherine said at that funeral. Her whisper wasn't just about Charles. It wasn't even just about Harry's second memoir. At its core, it was about William, her husband, the future king, the man who could lose everything if Harry decided to go for the jugular. That's what makes this next part so gripping, so emotional, and so dangerous. Because if Harry's next book centers more heavily on William, then Catherine's warning wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. Think back to Spare. Yes, Harry went after Charles. Yes, he painted Camilla in an unflattering light. But the most shocking and memorable moments were about William. He grabbed me by the collar and knocked me to the floor anecdote. The accusations of cruelty, jealousy, and rage. The idea that William wasn't the golden brother everyone thought, but a man consumed by anger. That stuck. That spread. And Catherine knows it. She knows that Harry isn't done. She knows her husband is still the main target. And that's why Catherine's whisper cut so deeply. She wasn't just protecting Charles as a father or the monarchy as an institution. She was protecting her husband's crown. Because Catherine is no stranger to the power of perception. She's lived in William's shadow. She's watched the press scrutinize their marriage. She's heard every cruel rumor and every whispered comparison between her and Meghan. She knows one bad story, one damaging detail, can stick forever. Imagine being Catherine, watching Harry sharpen his pen for another round. Wouldn't you feel you had to act? Wouldn't you feel compelled to warn Charles before it was too late? But here's where it gets complicated. William's relationship with Harry isn't just fractured, it's broken. Beyond repair, many say. The brothers who once walked side by side at Diana's funeral now barely exchange words. And Harry's first book already exposed their worst fight. But what if that wasn't the only confrontation? What if there are more incidents, darker incidents, waiting to be revealed? Catherine would know. She would have heard about the shouting matches, the slammed doors, the late-night arguments. And she would know exactly how damaging it would be for those moments to go public. Now, let's talk about the stakes. William isn't just any royal. He's the heir, the future king. His image must be pristine, strong, dependable. He can't be seen as violent, petty, jealous, or cruel. That's why Harry's stories cut so deeply, because they painted William in precisely those colors. And a second memoir could make it worse. Much worse. Catherine, staring across that church at Harry, would have felt the weight of it. She wasn't whispering to Charles out of malice. She was whispering out of fear. Fear that her husband's legacy could be shredded before it even begins. And let's not ignore the irony here. Harry often claimed in interviews that he wanted to protect William, that he held back out of respect for his brother. But Catherine likely saw that for what it was, a hollow claim. If Harry really wanted to protect William, Spare would have been very different. And if he truly respected William, why even write a sequel at all? That's the contradiction Catherine was trying to expose. Harry wasn't holding back. He was waiting for the right moment to strike. Here's a question for you. What would devastate the monarchy more, a scandal about Charles or a scandal about William? Charles has already lived through decades of criticism, from Diana to Camilla to cash for honors. But William? His brand is his strength. His destiny is the throne. If that collapses, the entire future of the monarchy collapses with it. That's why Catherine's whisper wasn't just an act of warning. It was an act of war. Now, imagine being Harry. Sitting there, listening, knowing Catherine was targeting you not just as a son, but as a brother. Her whisper painted you as a traitor to the heir. Her whisper put William above you once again, the favored child, the protected one. Of course Harry was furious. Of course his blood boiled. He has spent his entire life in William's shadow, labeled the spare, sidelined, dismissed. And here, at a funeral, his sister-in-law reinforced that very dynamic, protecting William at Harry's expense. Can you see how that would feel like the ultimate betrayal? But here's the cruelest twist. Catherine knew Harry's fury wasn't just about the book. It was about history repeating itself. Diana once confided in friends that William was the heir and Harry the backup. That dynamic shaped their entire childhood. And now, decades later, the same story was playing out again. Catherine whispering in defense of William. Harry fuming at being outed, undermined, and treated as the expendable one. The cycle continues. The wounds deepen, and the monarchy teeters. Let's dig deeper into Catherine's perspective. She has watched William sacrifice, endure pressure, play the long game. She knows the burden he carries as heir, and she also knows Harry has no such burden anymore. To her, Harry's freedom to attack, to expose, to lash out is a reckless luxury William cannot afford. So when Catherine leaned into Charles's ear, she wasn't just sounding an alarm. She was drawing a battle line, a line that said, William must be protected, no matter the cost. And Charles? Imagine the torment in his heart. On one side, his younger son, furious, unpredictable, and armed with stories that could destroy them all. On the other side, his elder son, the heir, whose image must remain untouchable. Charles's dilemma wasn't just about family. It was about survival. Survival of the monarchy. Survival of the Windsor name. Catherine's whisper forced him to confront an impossible truth. If Harry's book exists, he may have to choose between his sons. And that's a choice no father wants to make. Now here's the cliffhanger. Catherine's warning wasn't just about what Harry might publish. It was about what he might reveal about William. And the possibility that those revelations could damage the monarchy's future more than anything Charles himself ever did. That whisper wasn't just a family feud. It was a prophecy of doom. And Harry's fury in that church wasn't just about betrayal. It was about being cast, once again, as the villain in William's story. But what Catherine didn't realize was that Harry had already anticipated this moment. He knew his sister-in-law would protect William at all costs, and he had been preparing for it. Which means Catherine's whisper may not have exposed Harry. It may have triggered him. And the next step he takes could make Spare look like child's play. Clarence House. That name alone carries weight. The grand London residence, steeped in royal history, suddenly became the backdrop of what the press hailed as a miracle, a reconciliation. Just a week before Catherine leaned in with that fateful whisper at the Duchess of Kent's funeral, father and son sat face-to-face in the ornate drawing rooms of Clarence House. Cameras snapped. Headlines screamed. Charles and Harry reconcile. The image was powerful, almost cinematic. A grieving king opening his heart to his wayward son. But if you've learned anything about the royal family, it's this. What you see in public rarely matches the truth behind closed doors. Let's ask the question directly. Was Clarence House really about reconciliation? Or was it something else? Something colder, sharper, and far more calculated? Because when you peel back the gilded wallpaper, you realize the timing was too perfect, the smiles too rehearsed, the narrative too convenient. This wasn't just a father forgiving his son. It was theater. Think about the setup. Harry had been under fire for months. Public opinion had soured. Spare had earned him millions, but cost him credibility. His Netflix series with Meghan was mocked as shallow. The Spotify deal collapsed in embarrassment. Invitations to elite events dried up. And suddenly, just when Harry needed good press, he shows up at Clarence House. Smiling. Forgiven. Welcome back. Doesn't that feel a little too neat? Doesn't it feel like Harry needed that meeting more than Charles did? Now look at Charles. The king has his own struggles. Health rumors swirl. Questions about Camilla's influence grow louder. His reign is still fragile, still under the microscope. And what better way to appear strong, gracious, and magnanimous than by embracing his estranged son? The public loves forgiveness. They adore second chances. Charles extending an olive branch made him look like a wise, loving father, not a cold monarch. So, was Clarence House really about healing? Or was it about optics, for both sides? Here's the part that makes Catherine's funeral whisper so devastating. Because if Harry's reconciliation with Charles at Clarence House was genuine, Catherine effectively destroyed it by planting seeds of suspicion. But if it was fake, if Harry only used the meeting to soften the narrative before launching his next attack, then Catherine's whisper wasn't sabotage. It was revelation. It was peeling back the mask. And the look on Harry's face at the funeral suggests he knew Catherine had just exposed his entire game. Picture it. Charles and Harry sipping tea, nodding politely, reminiscing about Diana, perhaps even sharing a laugh. The press eating up every detail. And then, just days later, Catherine tells Charles that Harry is secretly writing a second memoir designed to devastate the monarchy. Can you imagine how Charles must have felt? Betrayed, embarrassed, humiliated. A king made to look like a fool, shaking hands with his son while his son was sharpening a dagger behind his back. Clarence House turned from a symbol of reconciliation into a symbol of manipulation. But let's flip this for a moment. What if Harry was sincere? What if, in that meeting, he genuinely wanted to mend fences? What if he wanted to reconnect with his father, to prove that he wasn't just a rebel with a book deal, but a son seeking love? Then Catherine's whisper wasn't just a warning, it was sabotage. A deliberate undercutting of Harry's fragile attempt at healing. Can you see why he'd be furious? Why his glare across the church pews burned with such venom? Because from his perspective, Catherine wasn't protecting Charles. She was poisoning him. Now, let's bring Meghan into the room. Do you really think she wasn't watching this reconciliation play out from Montecito? Of course she was. Reports suggest Meghan was suspicious of Harry's visit to Clarence House. Suspicious that Charles's forgiveness was too quick, too shallow, too staged. To Meghan, reconciliation meant weakness. Weakness meant vulnerability. And vulnerability meant they could be hurt again. Did she encourage Harry to go? Did she support the tea at Clarence House? Or was she warning him all along that Catherine and William would never let him back in? If Meghan's fingerprints were on Harry's thinking, then Clarence House wasn't reconciliation, it was reconnaissance. And let's not forget the press. They love Clarence House. The headlines practically wrote themselves: healing, reunion, a new dawn. But these same papers are the ones Catherine and Charles know all too well. The same ones that can turn overnight, that can crown today and crucify tomorrow. If Catherine whispered about Harry's second memoir to Charles, she wasn't just protecting her family. She was protecting the narrative. She was making sure the press knew. Don't be fooled by Clarence House. Don't buy the fairy tale. The war isn't over. So here's the paradox. Clarence House gave us the image of reconciliation. Catherine's whisper ripped that image apart. Which was real? Was Harry's smile genuine? Or was it a mask? Was Charles truly forgiving? Or was he playing the monarch's part? Was Catherine saving the monarchy? Or was she sabotaging peace? That's the question hanging in the air. And here's the cliffhanger. Because Clarence House wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of the next phase. If Harry's visit was about leverage, then Catherine's whisper exposed him. If it was about peace, then Catherine's whisper doomed it. Either way, Clarence House wasn't what it seemed. And the fallout from that meeting would echo into Harry's next moves. Moves that made Catherine's funeral whisper look like only the first shot in an escalating war. But the true force waiting behind Harry wasn't Clarence House, or Charles, or even Catherine. It was Meghan, the woman whose silence, whose strategy, and whose next play could tilt the entire balance of power. She wasn't in the pews. Meghan Markle wasn't there at the Duchess of Kent's funeral, and yet her shadow hung over every whispered word, every glance, every clenched jaw. Because for all of Catherine's warnings and Charles's conflicted emotions, the truth is this. Meghan has been the invisible hand shaping Harry's every move. And when Catherine leaned in to whisper about a second memoir, she wasn't just exposing Harry. She was exposing Meghan's strategy. Ask yourself this. Does Harry strike you as the kind of man who sits down with a publishing giant, maps out a long-term memoir plan, and quietly stores away files of damaging stories all by himself? Or does it sound more like the handiwork of a woman who knows how to play the media game, who understands the power of receipts, who has built a career on image, narrative, and reinvention? Meghan isn't just a supporting character in this saga. She's the co-author of it, perhaps even the architect. Let's rewind. From the moment Meghan entered Harry's life, the royal family underestimated her. They thought she'd adapt, conform, bow to the palace machine. But Meghan had other ideas. She came from Hollywood, from scripted drama, from an industry where your story is your currency. And she taught Harry something the royals never wanted him to learn, that his pain, his memories, his perspective had value. Not just personal value, market value. Spare proof that. And if Catherine is right, the second memoir will prove it even more. Now, Meghan's influence is subtle, often hidden behind Harry's public voice. She doesn't need to stand at a pulpit or whisper in a king's ear. She works in the background, seeding ideas, encouraging moves, reinforcing the narrative that Harry deserves to speak his truth, no matter the cost. To Meghan, the monarchy isn't sacred. It's an obstacle, an institution that never accepted her, never embraced her, and never protected her. So why not dismantle it piece by piece? Why not use Harry's voice, Harry's scars, Harry's memories, to do what centuries of critics never could? And here's where it gets chilling. Meghan has always understood leverage. That's why the rumors of Harry's files, notes, and recordings sound so plausible. Because Meghan knows better than anyone that stories without evidence can be dismissed. But stories with receipts? They're undeniable. And if Harry truly has a vault of secrets, it's not just because he wanted to protect himself. It's because Meghan taught him how to weaponize them. Let me put it this way. If Clarence House was about optics, Meghan saw straight through it. She would have told Harry, "Don't be fooled by smiles and tea. The palace will never accept you back. They will only tolerate you until they can crush you again." And Harry, torn between wanting his father's love and fearing his family's betrayal, would cling to Meghan's perspective. After all, who else has been by his side when the world turned against him? Who else told him he wasn't crazy, that his feelings mattered, that his pain had meaning? Meghan gave Harry what the royals never did, validation. And validation became fuel. Catherine, of course, knows this. She knows Meghan isn't just Harry's wife. She's his confidant, his strategist, his shield. Which is why Catherine's whisper wasn't just exposing Harry's potential memoir. It was indirectly exposing Meghan's hand in it. And that's what makes this feud so venomous. Because Catherine and Meghan aren't just sisters-in-law. They are foils. Two women shaping the future of the monarchy from opposite sides. Catherine preserves it. Meghan dismantles it. And Harry is the battlefield caught between them. Now, let's consider Meghan's silence. Isn't it odd how quiet she has been lately? The woman who once gave explosive interviews, who dominated Netflix specials, who stood shoulder to shoulder with Harry to tell their truth, now vanishes into the background. Why? Because silence is strategy. Silence creates anticipation. Silence lets speculation do the work for her. And in that silence, Meghan lets Harry take center stage, preparing for his second act while she waits in the wings. Calculated, controlled, chilling. And yet, Meghan's silence may also be part of the reason Catherine acted at the funeral. To Catherine, Meghan's quiet isn't peace, it's plotting. It's Meghan biding her time, holding back, waiting to unleash the next storm. That's why Catherine didn't wait. That's why she whispered then and there. She wanted Charles to know, the silence isn't safety. It's strategy. And Harry's second memoir, if it comes, will have Meghan's fingerprints all over it. But here's the cruel irony. Meghan's influence on Harry is both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. She empowers him to stand up to his family, to break free from the shadow of despair. But in doing so, she isolates him. She fuels his anger. She deepens the chasm between him and the people he once called home. And Catherine, watching from across that pew, could see it all. She could see the strings Meghan was pulling. The way Harry's fury wasn't just about her whisper, but about Meghan's whispered reassurances in his ear night after night. They'll never love you the way they love William. You'll never be safe unless you tell the world everything. So where does this leave us? With Meghan positioned as the silent mastermind, with Harry positioned as the vessel of her strategy, and with Catherine positioned as the lone figure trying to shield the monarchy from destruction. That's why Harry's fury at the funeral wasn't just directed at Catherine. It was also, indirectly, a defense of Meghan. Because Catherine's whisper didn't just expose Harry's plan, it threatened to expose Meghan's role in it. And here's the cliffhanger. Because while Catherine's whisper may have revealed Meghan's invisible hand, Meghan herself wasn't done. Silent in public, strategic in private, she was already preparing the next move. A move that would make Catherine's warning look like child's play. Every dynasty has its breaking point. For the Windsors, it isn't just about scandals, affairs, or even family feuds. It's about image. The monarchy's survival has always depended on the belief that they are steady, respectable, untouchable. And that's exactly why Harry's alleged second memoir terrifies them. Because this time, the stakes aren't just personal. They're existential. Ask yourself, what is the monarchy if not its image? Strip away the crowns, the castles, the centuries of tradition, and what remains is perception. The people must believe in it. They must see the royals as dignified, disciplined, and deserving of loyalty. Without that belief, the entire institution collapses. And Catherine's whispered warning at the Duchess of Kent's funeral was a direct reminder to Charles. Harry's new book could obliterate that image in ways Spare never did. Think back to Spare. It was embarrassing, yes. It was shocking, yes. But the palace weathered it. Why? Because they could spin it. Harry is bitter. Harry is exaggerating. Harry is telling his truth, not the truth. The monarchy still had plausible deniability. But what if the next memoir removes that shield? What if it's filled not just with stories, but with details, documentation, maybe even proof? What if Harry dives into areas the palace cannot spin away? That's where the devastation lies. Now, let's consider the kinds of revelations that could appear. It's not just about family arguments anymore. Insiders whisper about financial scandals, the kind the palace dreads. Questions about where money comes from, where it goes, who it benefits. Allegations of favoritism, of cover-ups, of secrets paid to be kept silent. Imagine Harry, armed with knowledge from his years inside, laying it all bare. Do you think the public would still see the monarchy as dignified? Or would they see it as corrupt, bloated, outdated? And then there are personal scandals. Stories about relationships. Tensions between Charles and Camilla. Fights between William and Catherine. Private remarks about Meghan. All the things said behind closed doors. Things that would sound ordinary in any other family. But in this family, they'd be headlines. And Catherine knew it. She knew Harry wasn't just holding anecdotes. He was holding ammunition. Ammunition that could ruin not just reputations, but the monarchy's very reason for existing. Let's pause here. Imagine if Harry's next book includes even one story that undermines the monarchy's moral authority. One story that makes Charles look weak, William look cruel, Catherine look complicit. One story that confirms the whispers people already suspect. That's all it would take. Because public opinion doesn't move gradually, it swings like a wrecking ball. One revelation, one scandal, one undeniable truth, and centuries of tradition can topple overnight. This is why Catherine acted. Because she sees the monarchy not just as a family, but as a legacy. Her children's inheritance. Her husband's destiny. Her own future as queen. And she knows that image is everything. Once destroyed, it cannot be rebuilt. Which is why her whisper at the funeral wasn't simply gossip. It was defense. Defense of the image, the brand, the myth that keeps the monarchy alive. But let's not forget the irony. Harry himself once embodied that image. The cheeky prince, the soldier, the beloved son of Diana. He was part of the myth, part of the magic. And now, he is its greatest threat. Who better to dismantle the monarchy than someone who lived inside it, who wore the uniform, who waved from the balcony? Outsiders can critique, but insiders can expose. And that's why Harry is dangerous. Because when he speaks, the world listens. And when he writes, the world believes. Now let me ask you this. Do you think the monarchy can survive two tell-alls? Do you think it can withstand another wave of global headlines, Netflix specials, late-night jokes, and endless online commentary? Or do you think a second memoir could be the fatal blow, the one that makes even loyal supporters throw up their hands and say, enough? That's the question Catherine was forcing Charles to face. That's the burden she laid on his shoulders with her whisper. And what about Harry's perspective? Does he care about the monarchy's survival? Or is he past the point of caring? For a man who has spoken about trauma, betrayal, and feeling like an outsider in his own family, perhaps dismantling the monarchy isn't a tragedy, it's justice. Perhaps the very thing Catherine fears most is the thing Harry craves, freedom through destruction. But here's where it gets even darker. Because if Harry's memoir does devastate the monarchy's image, it won't just affect Charles and William. It will affect Catherine herself. Her carefully built reputation as the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect queen-in-waiting could be shattered in a heartbeat. Harry knows this. Meghan knows this. And Catherine knows this. That's why her whisper wasn't just about protecting Charles. It was about protecting herself. And yet, the cruel irony is this. By whispering, by exposing Harry in front of Charles, Catherine may have accelerated the very thing she feared. Because now, Harry has a new motive. A new reason to unleash everything. Not just for money, not just for therapy, but for revenge. Revenge on the sister-in-law who outed him. The the woman who dared to whisper his secret at a funeral. Which leaves us here, at the cliffhanger. The monarchy's image hangs by a thread. Catherine has taken her shot, and Harry is more enraged than ever. But if Catherine thinks exposing the second memoir was enough to protect the monarchy, she's wrong. Because William, the heir, the golden boy, the man Harry once loved and now resents, is about to step into the spotlight. And the revelations waiting for him could make everything so far look like child's play. It always comes back to the brothers. Charles may wear the crown. Catherine may whisper warnings. Meghan may pull strings in the background. But at the heart of this storm are two men whose bond was once unbreakable. William and Harry, the brothers who walked behind their mother's coffin, who shared laughter in their youth, who once stood united against the world. And now, their relationship is a battlefield. Every word Harry writes, every whisper Catherine delivers, every decision Charles makes, it all circles back to William. And the tension between them has become the monarchy's greatest vulnerability. Let's rewind to spare. Out of all the bombshells, which story lingered the most in people's minds? The confrontation between William and Harry. The shouting, the grabbing, the shove that sent Harry crashing onto a dog bowl. That single anecdote did more to damage William's image than any tabloid rumor ever could. It wasn't just a brotherly fight. It was framed as proof of William's rage, his cruelty, his jealousy. And Catherine knows if Harry drops even one more story like that in a second memoir, William's reputation could crumble. Why does this matter so much? Because William isn't just a prince. He's the heir. His entire life is built on the idea that he is steady, dependable, kingly, a man of composure, a man of dignity. If Harry exposes him as volatile, violent, or vengeful, then the monarchy's future is compromised. The British public may tolerate a flawed Charles, but will they tolerate a flawed William? That's Catherine's nightmare. That's why her whisper wasn't just about Harry writing another book. It was about protecting William from being gutted in its pages. But here's the cruel paradox. Harry's most painful stories are also his most profitable. The world doesn't want to read about reconciliation or forgiveness. They want scandal. They want betrayal. They want the raw truth of what happens when the palace doors close. And William, as Harry's closest confidant and eventual rival, is the richest source of that material. If Harry wants to sell a second memoir, William will inevitably be at the center of it. Catherine knows this. William knows this. And deep down, Harry knows it too. Now imagine the tension this creates. Every smile William offers in public, every photo of him with Catherine and the children, every speech he makes as the future king, all of it could be undone by Harry's next book. One paragraph could erase years of careful image building. One revelation could make William look petty, cruel, or incompetent. And that's what Catherine was warning Charles about. That Harry holds the power to devastate not just the monarchy's present, but its future. Let's ask a harder question. Why does Harry target William so much? Is it jealousy? Resentment? Anger at being the spare? Yes, all of those things. But it's also because William represents the very system Harry hates. William is the heir. William is the chosen one. William is the symbol of the monarchy's cold hierarchy, the one that placed Harry beneath him from birth. Every time Harry takes a swing at William, he's not just hitting his brother, he's hitting the institution itself. That's why it cuts so deeply. That's why it's so dangerous. And don't forget Catherine's role in this dynamic. For Harry, she isn't just William's wife. She's part of the machine. Polished, perfect, adored by the press. The woman who fits the mold that Meghan never could. Every headline praising Catherine feels like a shadow over Meghan. Every photo of William and Catherine with their children feels like a comparison to Harry and Meghan. That resentment bleeds into Harry's view of William. It isn't just brother against brother. It's couple against couple. Future king and queen versus the exiled prince and his Hollywood duchess. A war of images. A war of narratives. And Catherine knows Harry has the power to drag her into it too. In Spare, she was painted as cold, aloof, even mean-spirited toward Meghan. What if Harry expands on that? What if he reveals private conversations between Catherine and Meghan, or moments where Catherine supposedly sided with William in humiliating Harry? That's not just sibling rivalry. That's a direct threat to Catherine's carefully constructed image as the gracious queen-in-waiting. And Catherine couldn't allow that risk to go unspoken. That's why she whispered. That's why she acted. But here's the cliffhanger. The relationship between William and Harry I.